Hello.
Hi.
Welcome back to How to End a Party.
We already sound like such downers.
Alright, I'm going to tell you why I'm bummed. Because I ordered microphones for us, but I was looking at it too quick. And I ordered the wrong kind of microphone, which is an easy mistake to make when you are poor. So I'm going to wait for the next paycheck and then we'll have a nice microphone. And then we can start doing our, paid stuff too. If people are interested in any of that, it'll sound better. And you can fund us getting nicer microphones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick, it came to my attention that some people might not know what the Bechdel test is.
Or how we're using it when we talk about Bechdel points in this podcast.
We discussed it outside of the podcast and it made perfect sense to us and then left everybody out of the joke. So that's a good way to know that it's a good joke is when you have to explain it. So, so the Bechdel test, if you are unfamiliar, was created by Alison Bechdel, and there was actually someone else too. It's just that her name was the first name on the study, and so she often gets the most credit. Sorry, other person, you can dock me a point for that. But so she created this test that basically was any two female characters in a form of media discussing anything other than a man.
They have to be named too.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they have to be named characters discussing anything other than a man.
Yeah.
And so we have sort of taken that idea. You will be surprised the number of shows that do not pass the Bechdel test or not, depending on how interested you are in that kind of thing. For our purposes, we've turned that into if you mention a man, you get a point added.
Are they getting added or docked? Are we docking ourselves points?
I mean, they're getting added up. I will say for the last one, we mentioned so many men that I was like, I have a concussion, deal with it. I'm not adding these all up. So my concussion is mostly better this week, so I should be able to keep note of it.
Yeah.
But
So for the purposes of this, our Bechdel score at the end of every episode is how many times we failed the Bechdel test.
Yes.
How many times we mentioned a man.
Yeah, how many times we don't get that quite right. And I'm sure even Alison Bechdel would be like, mentioning a man is different than talking about a man. And you're right, but it's more fun to do it this way.
Yeah.
So at the end of our episode descriptions where it says, sorry, Allison, it's specifically for you, Alison Bechdel. I hope you're listening and enjoying it and your party isn't lasting too long.
I hope you have better things to do than be listening to this, Alison Bechdel. Please don't perceive me.
You think so little of yourself.
Okay, so what's our topic for today?
Whatever the fuck we want it to be.
But for today specifically.
Oh, right. So it's a weird turn of events wherein you took a lot of notes and I took no notes.
Yes.
Because today we're talking about leaving evangelical culture.
Yeah. American evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, something that we're both relatively familiar with.
Oh, I was raised in it. Oh boy. And I do want to do a disclaimer.
Yeah. Please do.
Before we start talking about this. And that disclaimer is that if you're a Christian and you're listening to this, I am not trying to take your religion away from you with anything that I say or talk about, but as someone who was raised Christian and has been deeply hurt by some of that and by some Christians, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about the foundational tenets of Christianity and some of the issues that I have with them. I'm going to talk about the modern evangelical church and how it works and some of the issues I take with that. And I think as somebody, my kind of mantra here is if you've been hurt by it, you get to talk about it.
Mm.
So it's that you own whatever happened to you.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said it. And I should be docked a point just for that. But it's one of my favorite quotes ever, which is, you own whatever happened to you. Mm-hmm. Tell your stories. If they wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better.
That's fair.
I live my life by that very much. So that's just my disclaimer for today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I think if I were to have a disclaimer, it would probably be, just for me, a little bit broader. I respect religion's place in society. And the independent importance it carries for a lot of people. My views about religion are not overall positive. That doesn't mean that my views of spirituality are the same, because they're not. Yeah, and that comes from experience. So I'm only speaking from my experience and what I have studied of religion, because as we'll get into, I've spent a significant amount of my time studying religion. So yeah, I have thoughts and feelings that we'll get into, and it's not meant to offend anyone. If it does offend anyone, I think I want to say I understand when you believe in something and somebody criticizes it, it does not feel good. But sometimes that criticism is honest, and it might be worth listening to, even if it's a little painful.
Yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a heavier episode than our previous two.
Yeah, but that was kind of, honestly, when we were deciding on topics, this was one of the things that we talked about, was like, if it really is going to be, we get to talk about whatever we want. This is the kind of stuff we really want to talk about.
Yeah.
And so if you thought our other topics were light and fun, we'll get back to that for sure. But we're also going to have some of these like more serious, like, we have opinions on things and we want to talk about it.
Yeah. And I'm also a big believer too in like curate your own online experience, meaning if something is too upsetting for you, if you're not in a place to hear it right now, turn it off and go do something else. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
I won't be offended.
That's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
If you like take care of yourself and your mental health. Now, that being said, I'm actually going to start off kind of positive.
Okay.
Surprisingly.
All right. I'm good for it.
As I was making my notes, I was thinking about like, what was it like being raised in evangelical Christianity for me? When did it start to feel bad and hurt? And why did it hurt so much to leave if it was so bad? So that's kind of the trajectory I'm going on. But starting with, I feel like I have to state that at one point in my life, I was a true believer. I mean, I was a hardcore, really believed all of it, deeply ensconced in the faith I was raised in. I was raised in the Pentecostal church initially, which is pretty, I see the face you're making.
Oh boy.
And I will say it was not as, it was Pentecostal light, I think.
Pentecostal light.
Like my...
That's good. That's good. I like it.
My grandmother was, when she was growing up, was a lot more hardcore Pentecostal. By the time I came along, I was raised by my grandmother. By the time I came along, she had like mellowed out a lot. Yeah. She did allow me to cut my hair. She did cut her hair. We went to a church that was Bethel Temple Congregational Holiness Church.
Wow. Yeah. What a name. I love that.
And it's still around. Like, yeah. I actually drove past it when I was visiting home for Christmas.
Oh, wow. I can't remember the last time I've been by any of the churches back home, but I've been out of state for like 5 years, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually, whenever I go home, I have to drive by at least one of the churches I attended as a child, because it is kind of a proto-mega church.
Okay.
We'll get into that too. And it's on the hill right before you turn to go to my dad's house.
Interesting.
So I have to pass it every time I go home. And I see it and I'm just like, oh, that's still there. Yay.
That's still there.
But starting with, I was a true believer. I was very sincere in my beliefs. I talked to Jesus every single night. And I think that there were some benefits to that, because prayer is very meditative. You're getting all of your worries out. You're getting all of your fears out. You're spending some time just with your own thoughts, which can be very good for you emotionally, I think.
Yeah.
There was a bad side to it as well, which I'll get into later. But, you know, I was really big into reading the Bible and memorizing parts of the Bible and having favorite Bible verses. And I was also very a literal-minded child. So if the Bible said something, like, that was truth to me, and it was literal truth. And one of my first issues with the church was the cognitive dissonance of the things people pick and choose to take literally in the Bible, and me not understanding, well, if you say this is the true word of God, why do you like treat this like it's something you have to live your life by, but then this other thing is not, because it's inconvenient for you or whatever.
Right.
One of the first ones I ever remember was when I was a kid, probably from the time I was like 9, I wanted a tattoo. And my grandmother was horrified because she thought tattoos were awful, and she would tell me how it was desecrating my body, and my body was a temple, and I wasn't supposed to do that. And she even showed me the verses in the Bible where it said it, and I was like, okay, and this is me at 9 years old, okay, and bear that in mind. I was like, okay, but the Bible also says you're not supposed to like adorn yourself in jewelry and braid your hair and all of this other stuff. So why is it okay? Like you're wearing makeup, Mima, and you're wearing earrings. Why is it okay for you to do that, but it's not okay for me to get a tattoo? Mm-hmm. And she did not like that.
Yeah.
And I never got a good answer to that question. And I never got a good answer to a lot of questions, which was another issue. But
yeah, again, I think that tends to be a relatively common experience, I think, for people who have left or are leaving the Christian faith, is like, there's not a good answer. Like, I keep asking this question, and I'm looking for some sort of like, make this make sense. Mm-hmm. Like, I need an explanation as to why X and not Z, mm-hmm. right? And that answer is never given, because my perspective is that answer doesn't really exist. You have to do a lot of mental gymnastics. I was a great mental gymnast when I was in the church. If that translated into actually burning calories, I probably would have been very happy about that.
Oh, no.
But, yeah.
The note I have is thought-ending cliches.
Ooh.
The whenever I would ask a question like that, and I had a lot of them. We're going to get into real deep into the April lore today. I apologize in advance.
April lore.
But whenever I had a question like that, like, how, if God is so loving and God is so good, how could he allow this to happen? If he's all powerful and he could stop it, how can he be good and also allow so much suffering and all of this? And I never got an answer that actually explained that contradiction. What I would get is a thought-ending cliche, mm-hmm. which would be something like, oh, this is beyond human understanding. Like, God has a plan and this is beyond human understanding. Something like that, that's not meant to actually answer the question, but is meant to almost chastise you for asking it and get you to stop.
Absolutely.
It's to get you to stop thinking about it and just fall in line. Mm-hmm. And my experience, I'm not going to say Christianity, I'm going to say my experience growing up with Christianity was rife with thought-ending cliches. Every time I asked a question like that, the answer ended up being a thought-ending cliche. And as I got older and I got better at thinking critically about things, that was much harder for me to accept. Much harder. But when I was a kid, I liked church. Like, church was at worst a little bit boring when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. But I would sit there and I had like this big picture book Bible. It was the Bible laid out like a comic strip. It's probably in my dad's attic somewhere. I should find it because it was really cool. But I like loved my picture book Bible, and I loved to like draw. If the pastor was going over a specific story in the Bible, we had these little programs. They passed out a program about whatever it was going to be about that day. Mm-hmm. And I would draw the scene from the story on my program.
That's so precious. I like want to hug little April and just be like, you're so cute.
But yeah, when I was little, the worst thing for me about church was the itchy dresses.
Yeah.
I hated the itchy dresses. Especially Easter dresses. Oh my God.
Were they like cotton itchy or like polyester?
They were tulle.
Ugh.
They were ruffles and lace.
Ugh.
Itchy. Yeah. And there were some adorable photos of me in poofy hair in itchy dresses.
Yeah.
But it was a fight every Sunday because I hated wearing them. But that was like the worst of it.
Yeah.
Itchy dress, maybe a little bit boring sometimes. But like it was a place of community. Like, I felt very at home in the church that I grew up in. I can still remember there's like a certain smell that, places have a smell. There was like a certain smell that this building had. It was probably asbestos or something, for all I know, given how old the building was. But like that church, like I spent so much time just socializing at that church. Like it was a social center. And it was also, at least from what I remember as a child, bearing in mind that I was a child, it was also a lot less political. Like, I never heard our pastor preach about which presidential candidate to vote for or like any political issue. As a teenager, it was a different story. But as a small child, there was a lot less of like political polarization in church. It was almost like that was considered too worldly for the church to be concerned with.
Yeah, I can see that with some of the places we went. The other thing I was thinking was like, and I don't know if this was your experience, children's church was always a thing.
I love children's church.
So like you got essentially like ushered out of the adult conversation because you're too little and too stupid to handle it. And so, you get ushered out of that, and then you go into children's church where you talk about the fun stories in the Bible, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all that good jazz. So, like, it may have seemed less polarized just because the amount of exposure was less, but that's just one perspective.
Oh, that's totally possible. And we definitely had that. We had children's church. So I went to church 3 times a week. We had Sunday morning, Sunday night. I don't know why we needed it twice a day, but we did. And we had Wednesday nights. And so Sunday morning, I think was when we did children's church. So we would go downstairs into the fellowship hall, and we had children's church down there. There was a little upright piano in the corner. They did children's church. They were great. And then on Wednesday nights, we did missionettes. Were you in missionettes?
I was not, but
Girl Scouts for Jesus.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was. My parents were against anything. This is so awful. Like feminine anything. Wait. So like women getting together for anything other than cooking, cleaning, or having babies was not a good time.
Wild.
So that was not something that I was ever allowed, or I really wasn't aware of it until I got to high school. But yeah, Girl Scouts for Jesus.
Girl Scouts. Yeah, there was a boy one too. I think it was called Royal Rangers or something. I didn't clock at the time that it was basically Girl Scouts for Jesus, but I had the badges. But yeah, when I was a kid, church was very much social. I had a lot of friends at church. Most of the time after church, my grandmother would be either at choir practice or she would just be socializing with the other women in the church. And I would be outside. There was like a big, like open area outside behind the church, and there was like grass and trees, and there was a farm that we were not supposed to cross the fence because there was a bull in there, but we definitely dared each other to do it anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
But like I was, running around getting skin knees outside. It was like a good time.
Yeah.
So that part of it, the community part of it when I was really young, was very positive. At that point, we started moving to a new church, the proto-mega church. So when I was 11, actually probably before, like when I was 9 or 10, there was the pastor that had been the pastor since I was born, probably before that. I don't know if he moved to a different church or if he retired, but he stopped being the pastor. And a new pastor came in. And I don't remember anything about him except that he was a ginger, and his name was Pastor Bob.
Okay.
And he was very into this movement of like getting more kids into the church. He was very into, like, he wanted a mega church. Like back then I didn't understand that, but like now looking back at it, I was like, oh, he wanted a mega church. And he was very into bringing in new music and like bringing in all the praise and worship Hillsong music. And before that we had been hymnals out of leather-bound
Wow.
It was later in my teen years that it started to change.
Yeah.
It was also the early 2000s. It's actually fascinating. I could write a dissertation on this. It's so weird. I feel like when I was a teenager and a preteen, for every popular musician that was huge at the time, you could look at the Christian music industry, and the Christian music industry was literally just copy paste Kids Bop edition.
Yep.
But it was Jesus Bop edition.
Yep.
Like there was a Christian Eminem. There was a Christian, I still have one of those CDs. Oh God. There was a Christian Eminem. There was a Christian Ludacris. There was a Christian Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera.
Yeah.
Destiny's Child. Like all of the groups and artists that were super popular when I was a kid, there was a Christian version.
I'm trying to think of the Christian boy band that I was obsessed with.
Was it Jars of Clay?
No. No, even though, like, and some of that music, let's be honest, some of it slaps.
Oh, I literally have a Spotify playlist called Christian music that slaps, actually.
Yeah, there is some Christian music, especially from the 90s, that's like, this is actually some good shit. Okay. Even like some Reliant K and stuff. I wish I could remember. I'm gonna have to Google it here in a minute. I wish I could remember the name of that band, but like Zoe Girl.
Oh my god!
Was a band like for Halloween? Well, not Halloween because we didn't celebrate Halloween. Okay. So for a harvest party one year, I convinced two of my friends to go as Zoe Girl with me, and we like created a dance routine and stuff, and like performed at the party. It was like a whole thing.
Oh my gosh!
So anyway, yes, there's definitely some musicians that slap, and there are some that are less slappy.
Yeah. I was a huge DC Talk and Toby Mac fan.
DC Talk!
Was that them?
Oh my god, no, that wasn't it. But I love DC Talk. Oh, to this day, there's like, I will randomly get a DC Talk song stuck in my head, and I'm like, yeah!
Jesus Freak is high key. A great song. Also, the song What If I Stumble from that same album.
What if I stumble?
What if I fall?
Oh. Here we go. We're gone. We're like, this is the episode now. We're just going to talk about Christian music.
But like all of that stuff, like there was Christian music, there was Christian t-shirts, there were Christian like movies. I feel like there was a Christian teen magazine, Brio Girl.
Yes, I had Brio Girl. I did have Brio Girl.
That's the thing. I have not revisited the music I have. I haven't revisited all of the stuff from that time. But I do wonder sometimes, like, how awful is this if I were to go back and look at it with now eyes?
Yeah.
Because back then I was very much buying what they were selling.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't even being sold on it. I was already sold on it.
Right.
Like, again, I was a true believer. I was always trying to get my friends to come to church with me. I was that person. I was probably insufferable. And I do have to shout out to the people that knew me back then and still talk to me today. You are actual saints.
I love that.
Oh my God.
I don't have any of those people. So when we get to my story, you'll hear.
Yes. But he was very much into like updating the music and the format of how church went in order to draw young people in and keep them there. Which at the time I thought was cool because I was no longer bored at church.
Yeah.
And at the time, a lot of people thought was cool because there wasn't a lot of young presence in the church.
Right.
It was a very high average age of churchgoer at that particular church. But there was kind of a schism. On the one hand, there was Pastor Bob and the people that liked everything he was doing. And on the other hand, there were all the other people that did not like it at all. Like, I can't look back on it with any certainty and say if there was a right side here. It was just two groups arguing over the best way to be a Christian.
Yeah.
At the time, though, I was devastated because some weird political malarkey happened and they voted Pastor Bob out of his position as pastor. And I do know that my grandmother was very upset about it. She felt that it wasn't right. She felt that they had done some shady stuff to make it happen. We ultimately ended up going to a different church. And that was the proto mega church. It wasn't a mega church when we started going there. It probably isn't technically one now, but it really, really wants to be. Yeah. And puts a lot of effort into that. Yeah. It's at least like a semi mega church at this point. But we started going there and they were really putting a lot of stuff into the youth group. It was essentially the kind of church Pastor Bob wanted to turn the other one into. And I dove in headfirst. I was so invested in it. I was really involved in the youth group. We had a drama team. Ooh. I was involved in that. And
did you guys do like the live music dance?
Yes,
stuff?
We did.
Oh my God, that is such a like Christian youth group thing. Like I don't think other people do that.
Thankfully somewhere there's video evidence that I was on this drama team.
So if you don't know what this is, if you're not a part of that aspect of Christian culture. It's like where they would find a song, like a Christian song that slaps, like a good one, right?
Sometimes not even that. Evanescence got a lot of play, and so did Linkin Park.
That's for interesting. Okay, so picking a song and then like dramatizing it to some sort of Bible story, right? Like wordlessly acting out some kind of story to the lyrics of this song to make it more Christian or to make it fit. What I remember doing this for like Casting Crowns songs.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and like oh my god, and but you know the whole point is to like be emotionally manipulative. Like we're combining these images with this music to get you to feel something, and hopefully you do. I remember doing a lot of that as a kid.
Oh yeah, yeah. So we did skits. We did scripted, acted out little skits.
That's nice.
We also did just dances, just flat out dances.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably my least favorite. It's not really why I joined the drama team,
mm-hmm.
but our youth pastor's wife was really into dance. So we did a lot of dances, and I was always in the back because I have not great coordination overall. And then we did do, they're called human videos.
That's
which sounds so creepy.
Right?
But we did,
I forgot that's what they were called.
We did human videos, and we did a lot of them. We did our rehearsals every week. And I mean, every week I skipped much more fun things to be very dedicated to this.
Yeah.
We also did performances at church,
mm-hmm.
at our church. We also traveled during the summer and did performances at other churches. Our youth pastor would do the service for their youth group or their whole church, and we would do a performance.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would usually have an altar call. Don't even get me started on altar calls. We would usually do sometimes we did workshops with their youth groups to help them get a drama team of their own started. Sometimes we did like one-on-one prayer and mentoring with their youth group members, which mm-hmm. felt very weird because I was just another teenager.
Right.
But yeah, we did human videos. We also did a talent competition. There was, for the Church of God, that the church I went to was Church of God. They are very organized.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's hard to say that any specific denomination of evangelical Christianity is definitely a cult because their charismatic leader is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is a branch of evangelical Christianity that qualifies as a cult, it's the Church of God.
Mm.
They have their own university and everything.
Mm-hmm. This has big Glee vibes to me.
There was a reason I was really into Glee. It was like, oh, this thing I used to do, but queer this time.
But great. Queer this time.
Glee literally came out like the year before. So, Woman of the Week.
Woman of the Week.
Do you want me to tell you the name of the Woman of the Week, or do you want me to tell you her story and then...
I want you to do it in whatever way will bring you the most joy.
Okay. So, our Woman of the Week was born Augusta Ada Byron on December 10th of 1815.
Okay.
To her parents, George and Annabelle, also known as Lord and Lady Byron. Yes, that Lord Byron.
Okay.
I'm going to have to take the Bechdel point a couple of times in the story.
That's fair.
Give me some grace here. We are going to talk about Lord Byron a little bit.
That's fair.
But that's only because he influenced the trajectory of his daughter's life in a hilarious way.
Okay.
So we all know Lord Byron was a bit of a slut.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not shaming him for that.
Yeah.
I am, however, shaming him for being disappointed that his daughter wasn't a son. Like he was vocal enough about it that it is known.
That's
as a historical fact.
That's not good.
No, it's not. I'm also shaming him for sending her mother away when she was only 5 weeks old. Now, at the time, in cases of divorce, fathers were granted custody, like always.
Right.
But Annabelle took Ada with her.
Wow.
When she went back to stay with her parents, and George did not fight her on it.
So, okay, when we say like sending away, was this like she likely had postpartum depression sort of thing, and like he just didn't want to deal with it?
Oh, they got a divorce after that, so I think he like didn't want to be around her anymore.
Oh, he was like, "You've had my child, and now you are dead to me." Got
it's
it.
Like, you had my child, wasn't a son.
Right.
Bye.
Right. A good old Henry VIII kind of vibe. Got it.
And then he went, off to mess around with.
Oh, I just took a point for Henry VIII.
I feel like you should get more than one point for that one.
Shut up.
6. So, Annabelle, by this point, was so sick of her ex-husband's shit that she was absolutely determined Ada was not going to turn out anything like him. She didn't want her to have any poetical leanings whatsoever. She was somehow convinced that this would foster madness. And
not entirely wrong.
So to combat any of that, she made sure that Ada was educated in mathematics from a very early age. Lucky for Ada and for us, she was really, really good at it. She was basically a prodigy. And she had a lot of mentors. One of her mentors, Scottish scientist Mary Somerville, introduced Ada to a mathematician and engineer, who I will take another Bechdel point for, named Charles Babbage in 1833. So he invited Ada to see the prototype for his difference engine, and she was fascinated with it. And she spent a lot of time with Babbage and talking with him about his difference engine and his analytical engine, and talking through, problems around it. And he was extremely impressed with her intellectual capabilities and her mathematical capabilities. And they became friends and collaborators. And they remained friends and collaborators throughout her life.
That's awesome.
He was known to call her the Enchantress of Numbers. So Ada proved to not only be gifted at comprehending complex mathematics, but also explaining them to other people, which was something Babbage was not good at. Her work in translating and annotating an article on his analytical engine was very well received and gained her the support of respected contemporaries in science and mathematics. In her notations, so she actually put more notations down than there was article. Her notations were longer than the article. But in those notations, Ada included an algorithm for the analytical engine to compute Bernoulli numbers. This algorithm is now considered the first published computer algorithm, making Ada the first computer programmer over a century ahead of her time.
That's kick-ass.
So I do have to note, because we can't be afraid to criticize our heroes.
Of course.
As someone who followed all of the scientific, air quotes, developments and fads of her time, Ada also had some less savory interests, such as phrenology.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, phrenology is a branch of pseudoscience devoted to studying and linking the size and shape of the skull to mental traits. It was big with racism and ableism, as I'm sure you can imagine. It's possible that this and some of her other, she was also very into mesmerism. It's very possible that this was at least in part due to her mother's constant preoccupation with Ada's potential madness, inherited from her father.
Yeah.
They had a pretty strained relationship.
Yeah.
Now, much to Annabelle's chagrin, being a mathematical genius did not render Ada incapable of also being a bit of a wild child or being a little bit poetical. I love a rebel. She tried to elope with one of her tutors when she was 18.
That checks out.
But she was caught when one of his relatives recognized her and called her mom.
Aww.
She was also considered the life of the party at court. And she even became acquainted with some of her late father's friends.
Aww.
In adulthood, her friendliness with men who were not her husband led to rumors that she was having lots of extramarital affairs. Only one of those rumors was ever really substantiated. And she was also a fan of gambling and got into some deep gambling debts at one time in her life. She also liked to combine poetry and mathematics to question basic assumptions in mathematics and science and engineering. She believed that intuition and imagination were not at odds with math and science, but vital to their application.
Oh, I love that.
She was also really interested in philosophy, particularly metaphysics, and considered all of the above ways to explore the unseen world around us.
Love that.
She posited that computers could do far more than calculation and number crunching, and she was really the first person to posit this. Her mindset of poetical science led her to view technology as a collaborative tool, and she examined how that tool could relate to individuals and to society. In 1844, she told a friend of her desire to create a mathematical model for how the brain gives rise to thoughts and how the nerves give rise to feelings.
Interesting.
She was big thinker. She was very ahead of her time.
Yeah.
At the time, everyone else was just like, "Oh, good, it'll crunch the numbers for you," and she was like, "It can do so much more than that."
Right.
Of course, as often happens, many men have tried to erase or downplay Ada's contributions to science and math, and try to give Charles Babbage all the credit for her work and claim she was simply a student or even just a transcriber of his ideas. However, others combat this by pointing out that Ada was the first person of her time to see the potential of the analytical engine beyond mere calculation, and that while Babbage helped and commented on Ada's ideas just as she did on his, ultimately she was the one doing the work. And there is clear evidence of like innovation and like streamlining of ideas in her work that doesn't exist in his notes.
Right.
Today, her legacy, Ada Lovelace's legacy, lives on. Her name is often attached to awards and institutions aimed at providing greater recognition of women's contributions in STEM and greater opportunities for women in STEM. Some examples are the Ada Lovelace Award, the Ada Initiative, the Ada Developers Academy, and Ada Lovelace Day.
I love that. When you first mentioned her name, I was like, I don't know her as Byron. I know her as Lovelace. I'm so glad that you covered her. I think you did an excellent job.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
I enjoy her. She's great. Also, adding math and poetry is just right up my alley.
Right? Yeah, I absolutely love that. Women are so undersold.
Women.
I know. This is why we do Woman of the Week. So in the break, we decided we're going to make this a two-parter. So screw you if this is boring. I'm going to share a little bit about my origin story with the church. And then next episode, we'll sort of finish up our thoughts and ideas on this. It's a big topic, to be fair, which we will probably revisit, I think, in different ways.
There's so many facets of it. Purity culture.
Yeah.
I really do now want to do a whole episode on Christian music.
Right.
From the early 2000s.
Right? I want to find that band. It's gonna actually be painful. Physically painful.
I have a list on Spotify that I'm going to go through with you after this.
Yes. Yeah, we totally should. So I grew up in the Midwest. I don't want to share a ton of personal details. Again, my profession is kind of weird. So, I want to be open and honest. And I also, there are things that if you are a client of mine and you find this podcast, I don't necessarily want you to know all the nitty gritty stuff that could dox me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah. So I am going to be open and honest, but I also need to be mindful of that. Just because that's the world that I live in and I don't want to lose my license. I want to keep my job. So all of that being said, I grew up in the Midwest and we were definitely one of those church 3 times a week people. The twice on Sunday and then on Wednesday nights, occasionally on Saturday if it was open. Most of the time we were there. My dad was a deacon at pretty much every church that we went to. He always found himself in leadership, or I say found himself. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but he was always in leadership in church, and he often played music. So he was often in the band and doing all of the worship practice and stuff. And so we would have to be there for worship practice and run around like the little hellions that we were. When I was real little, we started going to an Assemblies of God church, which I kind of just want to put in here. This is one of those things that when you're in Christian culture makes perfect sense. And when you leave Christian culture, you realize how obnoxious it is. And that is there are so many different denominations.
Oh, the denominations.
And they all have a what's the word I'm looking for? A reputation.
Oh, and they all talk shit about each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what, when I was making the face when you were yeah, Pentecostal, I was I grew up freaking Baptist.
Ooh,
Like, so
no.
I know. So like we
used
can't
to shit talk the Baptists all the time.
We can't be friends.
From the pulpit, our pastor would shit talk the Baptists.
That would happen for Pentecostals too.
And
like,
we'd all shit talk the Methodists.
Oh yeah, for
So
sure.
much.
Everybody hated the Methodists. Which like now is funny because I'm like, if I were to go back to being Christian, which I don't see that happening, it probably would be Methodist.
Like they're
the most open-minded.
They're cool with women having positions of power.
Yeah.
They're cool with gay people most of the time.
Right, exactly.
Which is probably why all the other denominations shit on them so much.
Exactly. So Assemblies of God has this reputation of like, well, that's the other thing, is that there's like charismatic churches and then conservative churches, right? So like conservative churches are like the Baptists. And do Pentecostals consider themselves conservative?
I don't know. Pentecostal is borderline culty,
right? So I feel like it would like fall towards the end.
Like they're getting into the shouting and speaking in tongues.
Okay, so then that's charismatic. Because the way that I understood it, right, was like conservative was like we like to keep our wits about us when we praise the Lord, and charismatic was like we're gonna shout and scream and like laugh in the spirit and like all this.
Oh yeah, we were that one for sure.
Yeah. So that was like charismatic, right? Like we're going to be expressive and emotional in this way, whereas the conservative was more intellectual.
Why do I always end up friends with Baptists?
Because we're cool.
I
don't even believe that.
I have a lot of friends who were Baptists in a past.
Yeah. So I started growing up in an Assemblies of God church, which was very like laughing in the spirit and being slain in the spirit, which again, like if you don't, some of this stuff, like it is a different language. So I feel like on some level I need to kind of explain it if you don't know. Being slain in the spirit is essentially like being so overcome by the Holy Spirit that you faint.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, sometimes this is like, forced upon you, like you are sort of called out by someone in leadership and told like that you need to have hands put on you, and then like as the hands are being put on you, and from a psychological perspective, if you are surrounded by people in your community who put their hands on you and they all start talking at once, your nervous system is going to get so overloaded you don't have an option.
Yeah,
you don't have an option at that point, and that is like, from a psychological, physiological perspective, that is what's happening. But it's being called being slain in the spirit.
Yeah, it's usually like at the end of the service, there's an altar call, and it's like towards the end of the altar call, you've been there for hours at this point. It's hot. You're hungry.
Right.
Like, no wonder you faint.
Right. Right. And then on top of that, like speaking in tongues is also a very big thing. There's a lot of, I could get into the theology of speaking in tongues for days, and I won't, because this party will be over long before then. But I think that, there's a lot of criticism that I think is fair for speaking in tongues. But I also think there are some people who genuinely believe that that is a spiritual experience for them, and I don't want to take that from them.
I was actually going to ask you, but then you said you were Baptist. So I'm guessing you never spoke in tongues.
That's not entirely true.
Oh, really?
We'll get there.
Okay.
So
I have never spoken in tongues for reasons, and I'll tell you about those probably in part 2.
Yeah. No, that's fair. So started out real young, probably like 4 or 5, going to the Assemblies of God church. My main memories from that church are not great. For several different reasons. Mostly I was being groomed and assaulted by a person there. So not fun.
No.
But those are the majority of my memories there. And then we moved to a Baptist church after that, which is a bit of a switch, right? We're going from like speaking in tongues and all of the stuff that happens with that, and then we're going to, okay, now it's all intellectual. It's all, like we're going to study theology. We're going to try to understand all of these different things. And there, I really, it's sort of like you were saying, like I really flourished. Like I had friends from there. I was the kid who was running around all the time. Like there were these metal bars on the like rail into the church, and I would like do flips on them and like do like stunts and stuff. Like I can't, the number of times I almost cracked my skull open, it's incredible. Like someone was watching over me, and it may have been Jesus. But like that was a really like sing from the hymnal kind of time in my life. Very small church, and we were there for the longest period of time. Like we did some church hopping, but the longest church that we were in was that church, and it was the Baptist church. And then I think it's interesting how you were saying like in the early 2000s, Christians kind of got their shit together and like we're unified in this front of like we're gonna be evangelical. And in my mind, that is directly linked to the turn of the century. Like we were having a New Year's Eve party on New Year's Eve 1999, right? Like, and I remember my dad acting so strange and being so confused about it and being like, why is this such a thing? And truthfully, he believed that Jesus was coming back. Jesus was coming back like right then and there. And there was this level of fear, I think, that infused itself into my childhood because of that, of like at any given moment, this could all be over.
Oh my God, I know. I honestly think 9/11 had a lot to do with it too.
Yeah.
The surge in xenophobia and Islamophobia and nationalism after that really changed the church in a lot of very not positive ways, and really got people gung-ho about the end times.
Yes.
We could have a whole episode on rapture trauma.
Oh my God, yes. I was just going to say, like, the idea of, like, the number of times I would wake up in the morning, and I've always woken up early. I'm very much like my dad in that way. The number of times I would wake up early in the morning and no one else would be moving yet, and I would be dead afraid that everyone else had been taken to heaven and I had been left behind. That was a weekly occurrence at least.
Oh, one time my grandmother, so I woke up late on a Sunday morning to an empty house and a dress just thrown across the bed.
Oh my God.
And I panicked. I genuinely thought the rapture had happened while my Mima was getting ready for church.
Yeah.
And then I had been left behind.
I am legitimately having fear, like in this moment, just talking about it. That reaction is so deep in me.
And I think that churches, at least, I don't want to go too much off on a tangent, but there were a couple of times in my life when I know that the church I was in and the person who was speaking was actively fostering that fear.
Yeah.
Like we'll get into it eventually when we come back to my shit. There were a couple of instances that I can only classify as emotional terrorism.
Yeah.
Where they very heavily traded on that fear
to
get people to the altar.
And I think that is, when I said like last week, like still better than church camp, that's my experience of church camp, is that kind of emotional fear. Because the church camps that I went to, I think I started going like 6th or 7th grade, and I went to church camp all the way through graduating high school. And then I worked at a church camp the summer that I turned 18. So like that's a whole other story in and of itself. But like all of the church camps that I went to were very, very conservative and very, very focused on the rapture. And so it just like that sort of emotional manipulation, especially with kids, and I'll get more into this into the second half of it, but like it fucking works. Like that's why they do it. Like, because it works. Right. And so, I was hook, line, and sinker as well. Just very like, this is the way that things are going to be. And this is the way that God has ordained it. And very much the same with like those, anytime I questioned, I would do so many mental gymnastics to like wrap my mind around all these different things that like, yes, it all works together. And even if I don't understand how it works together, that's part of it working together. And so like having to put faith in that. And if you don't have the faith, then like you're the one who's going to get left behind. And so like, how do you test if you have faith? I remember as a kid, I think I prayed the prayer of salvation like 8 or 9 times in a year because I just wasn't sure. I was like, how do I know I'm saved?
Oh yeah, it was every Sunday. Or we used to go to Florida every year for something called Sunfest.
I've heard of.
SON
Yes,
Fest.
I've heard.
And when you're a kid, you're not going to leave that to chance.
Mm-mm.
You're not. It doesn't
Like
matter.
you're telling me that my parents and my siblings and my dog and like all of these people are going to be literally left behind. They wrote a fucking book series about it.
Oh, I was about to say, and those books were
I
big then
know,
too.
and like they're literally going to be left behind, and I won't ever get to see them, or they won't get to see me if I get left behind. Like the implications were so incredible, and I think this is why, to some extent, when people have criticism of Christianity and Christians aren't willing to listen to it, it's like, I understand why.
Yeah.
I understand, like, there's a lot on the line for you. And I'm not even here to say, like, you shouldn't be afraid of some of that stuff. We can have a discussion about why I'm not really afraid of that stuff, but that's different. Like, this is very real for you, and I'm not going to belittle that in any way, right?
Yeah. Well, when you're really young, I forget what age it is, but when you're really young, you don't really understand the difference between fiction and reality.
Yep.
And that's when, if you're raised Christian, that's when they start telling you these things.
Yep.
So if you're told from essentially birth that this is real, you're going to believe that, and that's going to anchor itself in you. And to this day, there's still it's smaller and smaller every year, but it's still there. It is a very small part of me that still wonders.
Yeah.
And still is a little bit afraid.
My brother is very openly atheist, and he has told me that there are times where, like, especially if someone in his family, like his wife or his child, is sick, he's like, if I'm sitting in the waiting room, I'm praying.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, we had the same upbringing, you know, like, and he walked away long before I did, and he's like, if there's shit hitting the fan, like, that's what I'm doing, because that's still that piece of me. That's what I know to do in a crisis when I have nothing left to do. Yeah. And again, I think we'll probably talk more next time. I'll get the opportunity to talk a little bit more about why I'm okay with that, and can justify that, and still being an atheist. But I want to make sure that I get the rest of my origin story in. So, so we went to this church, this Baptist church, and after a while, I'm not really sure why we left. I know that it had something to do with my mom feeling stifled there, but there wasn't really a big story as to why we left, but we left, right? So we hopped around to a couple different places. Again, like, I think that it's hard to understand some of the family dynamics that were happening for me at this time. We ended up going to a church, and we were only there for a little while, and then one of my sisters passed away unexpectedly. And so, like, as much as that's not part of the story, it is part of the story, because the way that people responded to that, the way that the church reacted to that, the way that my parents reacted to that, like, it all had something to do with the way that I envisioned the church actually functioning and working as the body of Christ, as, like, this community together. So, like, as much as it's not something I want to get into the details of, it is something that I think is important to include in the story. Mm-hmm. So that church ended up splitting, kind of very much the same. There was, like, a pastor who came in. We had two Pastor Dans, and, like, Pastor Dan 1 was upset with Pastor Dan 2, or vice versa. Who can remember why at this point? And the church ended up splitting. We stayed at the church at that point, but then, like, a year or so later, left and went to a completely new church. This place was non-denominational, which I think also carries a stigma with it. That's the word I was looking for. Oh, yeah. It also carries a stigma with it, because people are like, okay, so you can't decide what your theology is? And it's like, no, we just are kind of open to a bunch of different interpretations, and maybe the Methodists have some things right, and maybe, you know, the Catholics have some things right. Like, who's to say?
Oh, the horror.
I know, right? And so that's, like, unbelievable. So you can kind of see, like, my parents' trajectory, right, of, like, their spiritual experience here, is that we went from very charismatic to very conservative to a little bit less conservative, and now we're getting to be a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're starting to think a little bit more outside of the box. Like, maybe it needs to be both, right? We need to be able to feel it, but we need to be able to think about it too. That was where the harvest party happened, where I dressed up as Zoe Girl. Mm-hmm. So, good times.
I love that.
I had a boyfriend there for like a week because I wasn't allowed to date, but I always had boyfriends because that was just
Same.
the way that I was. I was homeschooled my 8th grade year, which is the same year that my sister passed away. And that was a really rough year in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt really isolated for a lot of reasons. I was taken out of public school. We started at this new church. I didn't know anybody. The people who did know me are like, oh, that's the girl whose sister died. So like, or at least I perceived it that way, whether or not that was actually what was happening. So anyway, there was a private school that a couple of families at the church went to that was a Christian school. So I started my high school years as a freshman going to a private Christian school. I loved my high school experience. I had a very small class. I had a graduating class of 8.
Wow.
Yeah, which it was supposed to be 9, but somebody dropped out at the end because they didn't get into National Honor Society when everybody else had. It was a whole thing.
Oh my.
But yeah, I had a graduating class of 8. There were 6 women, 6 young women and 3 young men. So like there was a lot of camaraderie with women. Even though sometimes we would still bicker and stuff, like we were all friends in a sense, or at least like didn't hate each other. Like the boys were like, we're not going to date anybody because we're not stupid.
So, we know that. See, I wish my youth group had thought that way.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, we're not dumb. So I met my best friend. We were best friends for 10 years. I met her in that high school, and that was such a great experience. The teachers there were great. I was like a C/D student in public school. I went to like A's and B's in private school. Like it was just a great transition for me all the way around. All of that to say, we had chapel on Wednesdays, and chapel was also like very much like church, very much like altar call at the end of every chapel. I learned like way too late. I learned that there were people who would just go to the altar call every time to get it over with sooner, and so that chapel would be done faster.
That is so smart.
I learned like probably the end of my junior year that people were doing that, and I was like, oh my God. I was so like angry, not that they were faking it, but that I hadn't thought of it. I was like, that's so brilliant, because chapel was really awful a lot of the time. Because of chapel, my parents stopped forcing me to go to church. So because I had the option, I think it was also like my sister had passed away. I was the only kid left at home, and I didn't feel like going to church. So they were like, we don't know how to be good parents in this moment, so we're just not going to force you to go. Like you're still getting the church that you need from school, so we're not going to make you also do this on the weekends. So I had some agency there that like my older siblings didn't have. I decided to go to a Christian university because again, I was kind of bought hook, line, and sinker into the faith. Like this is what's supposed to be happening. Like even though I'm learning things and experiencing things that are sort of outside of what most Christians are telling me are good things, I'm also being told that they're normal things that you have to overcome. Yeah, I have queer attraction, but that's okay because a lot of people struggle with queer attraction, and like you'll just have to keep praying harder. Like this is going to be your struggle. This is your gift.
Oh God.
That you'll get to struggle with.
Same hat.
Yeah. There was that, and then I was just a smart kid. Like I don't mean to brag about myself, but like I was a smart kid, and so I was putting things together without really knowing I was putting it together. And we had Bible class all year through high school, and I studied a bunch of theology. I had really well-formed ideas about the things that I believed, but because of the culture that I was in, I had to keep those ideas to myself. Like women aren't really allowed to have theological opinions. in either the Assemblies of God or Baptist circles. So like I'm learning all of this stuff and I'm understanding it from a perspective that I want to discuss and I want to debate, and I'm not really getting the opportunity to do that. So I think Christian college felt like the next best step. Like this is where maybe I'll get to go find people who are willing to talk about it with me. And sort of the same logic applied of like, because it's a Christian college, I don't have to go to church, and my parents weren't there to make me go, even if they had been doing that in the first place. So there was like no real incentive to go. So that was that.
Oh, I'm surprised they didn't church, like it's part of your curriculum that you have to attend chapel a certain amount of times.
Yes.
And you're only allowed to miss a certain amount of times, yes, or you can get tossed out of college.
Yeah, we had that. For personal development, I think it was the right place to be. And even if it wasn't, I've made it the right place that I was in, right? But I think that for my intellectual development, I really kind of kicked myself in the pants there. The classes I was taking, they were decent, but they weren't as challenging. And then some were super challenging. And I mean, I have a major and 2 minors from there, so it's not like I didn't kick butt, because I did. But you know, it's still, I think I could have, if I had gone somewhere else, I may have been able to find the path I'm on now sooner. But then again, maybe not, because I had a lot to undo. I had a lot to work through, because I was very much, at Christian colleges, they call it going for your MRS degree.
Yeah, I heard that at mine too, even though it wasn't. It's a Christian affiliated school without being Christian.
Gotcha. Yeah, so a lot of people were there for their MRS degree, and I was very adamant that that wasn't why I was there, but I was also very adamant because this was the story that both of my older siblings had gone through, that I would meet the person I would marry there, and I would get married to them by the time I graduated. Like, that was their story. That was the story of a successful Christian. So even though I wasn't there for my MRS degree, that was going to be a byproduct.
Yeah, you were still supposed to get it.
Right, exactly.
In addition to your...
Exactly. I was supposed to get my degree, my major, my 2 minors, and then also get married. So, and that's what happened. There was already a lot of deterioration happening at that time, which I think we'll probably have to talk about next time.
Yeah. We leave your story off in college with your faith deteriorating.
Yeah.
And we leave mine off in high school.
Yeah.
With my faith deteriorating. So we'll see how that works next time and what it led us to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So stick around or leave the party already. We don't care. I mean, you do what feels right to you.
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about next week?
I honestly don't have a clue. I forget. Whatever we want. The same thing we talk about every week.
Like, he was legally blind, but he was an artist. That was what was so cool about him. Like, he drew all these incredible pictures of Lord of the Rings and scenes from the movie and stuff, and I was a huge Lord of the Rings nerd at the time.
Same.
Still am. And so anyway, yeah, that's right, I dated that kid. Anyway,
at that point in my life, I was just parasocially dating Sean Astin in my mind.
Yeah, that's fair. I was parasocially dating Aragorn. It's fine.
Not the actor Aragorn. No. Specifically.
Aragorn.
Yeah, for me it was Sean Astin. It wasn't Samwise. Not that I had anything against Samwise. I loved him.
That's fair. No, I was definitely dating Aragorn for sure, because I watched Hidalgo and I was like, nah, that's not doing it for me.
Not the same.
Wow, what a niche callback. Anyway,